right, welcome everyone. We're here back with Infinite Layers. Today I am joined by Andrew, the founder of Conduit. Do you mind giving us a quick intro to yourself and to your company?
Yeah, so I'm Andrew. I'm the founder and CEO of Conduit. Conduit is a roll-up platform that enables anybody to launch their own layer 2 or layer 3 on Ethereum today. We have all of the modular options available. So we work primarily with the OP stack and Arbitrum. We kind of take those and enable you to kind of mix and match various parts of the modular toolkit to really enable the kind of like product that folks are trying to build today. So we have over 30 mainnet rollups deployed today. We have hundreds across testnet, and it's really exciting to see what builders are actually building today. And if it used to be took tens of millions of dollars to launch your own chain, I think we've brought it down to like $3K a month. And I think we're excited to see what that really kind of enables. And we're kind of just getting started here.
Awesome. Yeah, I have tons of questions for you, and we're going to go over a lot of them, I think, in just a moment. But I guess the first thing that I'm just going to ask, and this might not have specifically anything to do with the topic, but yeah, so tell me, like, with layer 3s and what the actual meaning of that is, and when someone would choose to do that as opposed to like launching a layer 2. Let's talk about that for a moment. Do you mind just kind of giving like a quick overview of your, I guess, definition or perception of what an L3 is and when someone might choose to go that route as opposed to an L2?
For sure. I think it's I think it's more of a less of a technical term and kind of more of a, I think, just semantic term in terms of, I think, developers understanding what that is and users understanding what it is. And so a layer 3, as we envision it, is just a roll up that settles to another layer 2. And the advantage of this is that settlement costs are much, much cheaper. So if you think about launching your own layer 2, for example, like Mode and Zora are good examples of networks on Conduit that are their own layer 2s. There's just a bit more activation energy you need. And in some sense, you're competing with kind of the Arbitrum 1s, the bases of the world. And so you maybe need a bit more firepower to do that. And I think if you look at settlement costs, which are primarily based off of what Ethereum mainnet gas prices are, that can get expensive. And so what layer 3s really enable is for you to kind of bootstrap your kind of network and ecosystem and adoption off of an existing layer 2. And so where we've seen this really take off is on Base and Arbitrum 1, which are kind of the biggest layer 2s out there today. And so the advantage is you get your own dedicated block space and kind of the same form factor as an L2. But bridging into the rollup is much cheaper. Settling is much cheaper. And so for applications that want to draft off kind of the ecosystem, we think it's an increasingly kind of attractive option for those developers.
Got it. So with Base, you called out Base and Arbitrum 1 specifically. How about Optimism? Are you seeing more people choose Base than just Optimism?
Yeah, so Base is definitely leading the charge on kind of the superchain front. And I would say Optimism, in some ways, I think even internally within kind of Optimism is kind of taking the backseat and is more of a governance chain. And I think it's also important that the developers of the OP stack run a chain, so they kind of understand kind of what they're running. And so we definitely see most of the demand around where most of the activity is. And so Base is leading the charge there. It has most of the users and the assets. And then when gas fees go up and the chain gets congested, that's increasingly kind of a reason to launch your own layer 3 to help insulate from some of those gas spikes.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I've definitely noticed that a lot more developers are building on Base these days. And I think like they've done just a really excellent job, and they've also have quite a few applications that people know and use that people love. So they have like this thriving ecosystem. But it's kind of interesting to see how that kind of played out, considering that like Optimism itself is now seeing like less excitement and hype in terms of where developers deploy than base. But and then to kind of like see that ultimately play out now with L3s is also even more interesting, right? So yeah, just a thought.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's in some ways kind of like the Netflix self-disruption kind of tactic. And so Netflix used to mail people DVDs. And then they kind of realized it wasn't the future and built kind of the streaming technology, which kind of cannibalized their kind of pre-existing business, which, at the time was actually pretty good. And I kind of view what Optimism is doing in kind of the same lens, right? Where unlike Arbitrum One, where I think, yes, they're leaning into Orbit and having many chains, I still think Arbitrum One and Arbitrum Nova are kind of distinctly the priorities there. I think Optimism mainnet in that sense is really taking a back seat. And I think they're kind of making Superchain and kind of this network of interconnected rollups kind of the first class thing that they're focusing on. And so, it's in terms of the chains that they're getting, it's super interesting and it seems to be working. And so, I kind of think that being willing to self-disrupt feels to me kind of a unique strategy, and I think it seems to be working for Optimism.
So can you tell me a little bit about how Conduit was formed and your background and how you became a founder and choosing this specific vertical to focus on?
For sure. So I'd been kind of an engineer for 6 or 7 years previous to starting Conduit. Where I cut my teeth was at this company called Wish, which is like I don't know if you ever used it, but you could buy super cheap like products from China on it. I worked on infrastructure there, and it was one of the fastest scaling companies ever. I think we ran some of the largest database clusters in the world. And so with that kind of scale and that kind of fast growth, it was a really good place to learn that stuff. I kind of call Wish like the crypto company before crypto companies, because they were so good at targeting users with like Facebook ads, which in some ways is the equivalent of like being really good at airdropping tokens or kind of incentives, but then failed to build like a sustainable business model. So like grew super fast. We like reached basically like the 2 billion, 3 billion people globally that were kind of in our target demographic. And then we just weren't able to build something sustainable there, which I think is kind of how a lot of crypto products in kind of the last era kind of went. So it was interesting to see that. And then I joined a startup afterwards that ended up getting acquired by Twitter. I worked on engineering product there. And at the time was also dabbling into crypto, had always been interested from kind of the Bitcoin days, just because it was a very novel kind of technology. And in particular, I think a lot of classic computer science is in some ways antithetical to what crypto is doing. It's just a very different kind of take on it. And so I'd always been like interested and curious, and like I think with the background of like scaling, I think the question came up is how do you actually, crypto is super interesting. I think we really felt this in DeFi summer, where gas prices went up, super high, and we saw a lot of volatile ones launch because of this. And I think for me, the question was ultimately crypto is super interesting. It's like freedom technology, but kind of the cost of that is it can be very expensive, right? And so how do we scale this freedom technology so that anybody can use it and it doesn't cost like $1,000 to do a Uniswap swap? And that's really where rollups came into play. And like these technologies were just getting to the point where they were like production ready and kind of battle tested. And I think the thought was, what if you take this tech, which is really great, it scales freedom, it scales autonomy and sovereignty, and make it accessible to anybody at a price point that makes sense. And so that was the genesis of Conduit, and that was maybe a year and a half ago at this point. And yeah, I think in the last year and a half, we've made a lot of progress in terms of folks identifying that this tech can actually help them scale, and doing it in a way that really enables them to build better and kind of more full-fledged applications.
Okay, very cool, very cool. Yeah, it sounds like you've had like pretty cool experience, and I think I understand the crossover between I feel like certain types of e-commerce and then crypto. I feel like there's a lot of stories where people like have had experiences there. Like I just talked to to the near founder, and I personally had my own experiences. I think the thing that really made crypto seem interesting to me was my experience with PayPal, and PayPal basically had my business relied on PayPal basically and had a lot of money flowing through PayPal and a lot of money just sitting there because I treated it like a bank. And then one day they just kind of like stopped letting me have access to it due to a fraudulent charge that was not, accurate. And ended up kind of like costing me the whole company because it just took so long for them to unlock. And I had vendors and stuff like that to be paid anyway. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting to hear different people's backgrounds. So I have a lot of questions about like Conduit itself, but before I do that, do you want to give us a quick demo or something, or just some type of introduction to what it looks like to maybe to use Conduit, and then I'll come back and ask questions based on what you haven't already answered, maybe.
Definitely. So let me take you to kind of our dashboard. And so this is, and assuming that you guys can see this, but
Yes.
this is our dashboard. If you go to app.conduit.xyz and you just sign up, you can kind of get taken here. We have, we obviously have a bunch of these just for internal testing, but essentially, like I think Rollup is kind of becoming the new server in the same way that you might go to AWS and kind of launch some compute. We want that experience to be as seamless on Conduit for developers to basically create net new compute. And so you can see here in our deployment UI, it kind of guides you through the various options here. Today, we support the OP stack and Arbitrum Orbit. These have different settlement layer choices. So obviously, if you're settling to layer 1, you'd be a layer 2. There are different data availability options and different modes here. And then for Arbitrum Orbit, obviously we have other settlement layers as well. So you can be an L3 on Arbitrum 1, you can be an L3 on top of base. And there's some nice little kind of social proof here. So like dgen, for example, is an Arbitrum Orbit settling on base L2 using the AnyTrust DA. And it's as simple as, you can select testnet here. You can even select mainnet and deploy. We've actually had a few teams in the last couple of weeks, deploy their mainnets without talking to us, which was surprising and also kind of bullish. Of course, we have other advanced features. So if you want a custom gas token, you can kind of just paste in the contract here, and everything will just work. So in terms of kind of a post-deployment one, so this is an example of an Arbitrum Nitro stack after deployment. You can see you get kind of the RPC, WebSocket endpoint, block explorer. You get a bunch of information. So this looks like it's just using Ethereum. You can create a bridge. You can trace transactions. This comes baked in with like a bunch of metrics. You can see the the contracts here. And of course, you can like customize. So that's a big point here, which is you can self-serve, brand your kind of block explorer. There are a bunch of advanced options. You can set DNS names, and I think increasingly what this is becoming is you can go from no rollup to rollup deployed on mainnet in as little as a couple of weeks, and we want to even bring that down further. And so I think we envision a world of like millions of rollups. And if we're going to get there, I think we need to make it even easier than it is today, and kind of at a price point that enables you to just start and kind of experiment, and then allows you to build and scale kind of without limits.
Got it. So essentially, like what like you mentioned before, in the past, it would take teams like years and millions of dollars to build, is now just kind of like into a UI, which is to me kind of insane, to be honest, to kind of see this progress so rapidly in the last couple of years. With like the current options that you're seeing, you're start like there's obviously this decoupling of all the different pieces of a roll up stack now. Started with DA, and now you're seeing other pieces. Can you kind of talk about the different things that are options here, and like building your own stack, and then maybe what you might start offering in the future in addition to what's here? Like, are there people like asking for other pieces, like different types of sequencers and maybe co-processing, and I mean you have block explorers and all these other things.
For sure. So I think one, there's obviously the options that we have here today. For example, EigenDA. We get asked about this a ton, and I think being able to kind of go through this process and have the information, and importantly, just like test it out, is kind of a huge unlock in terms of barrier to entry. So we're excited about kind of the self-serve aspect. You don't need to talk to anybody. You can just come here, cost $50 a month, and you can just play around with it. In terms of other modular options, well, one, and maybe this is easier to show here. So we have a bunch of integrations here, and that enables you to kind of take these apps that you might have on other platforms and launch them on your own rollup. Today, it's a bit more of a manual process. In the future, and actually very soon, we're going to have the ability to one-click add these products to your rollup. And so one of the things that we're noticing is that we've de-risked and like made it really quick to deploy. But then there's if I need account abstraction, I have to talk to account abstraction providers. If I need bridging, fast bridging, I need to talk to fast bridge providers. And handling the BD as well as the integration could take anywhere from like a couple of weeks to a couple of months. And so by kind of streamlining that process and bringing it into the application, we want to just kind of accelerate those timelines. In terms of other modular things like sequencing, we definitely have plans on adding, options here. I think the question for some of those is like, is there anything in production today that actually works? And I think like what we want to ensure is that anything that we put here is something that, you would feel comfortable actually using on mainnet. And I think you can even see some of the designations here where, if we look at plasma mode, which is like a new, mode coming for the OP stack, it's a very new technology. And we just want to ensure that folks have the context going in on the state of this. Like, is it alpha? Is it beta? How many people are using this? What are some of the downsides? And oftentimes in crypto, there's kind of a narrative element where people just want the latest thing or the thing that's kind of most hype, even if it might technologically or at a substance level not really do anything or not be stable. And so, I think for us, again, we want to meet our customers where they are, but we want to make sure that when they make the decision, they're going in with it with kind of eyes wide open. And so importantly, that's how we kind of add these details within our UI, but also enabling them to actually test kind of the configurations on testnet before going to mainnet gives them an opportunity to see for themselves the kind of state of the state of the technology and how battle tested it is.
So how often do people just build this on their own through the UI versus how often do they reach out to you for custom integration support? And do you feel like if someone wanted to build the next, I don't know, non-trivial company that might be $1 billion company one day, would you recommend them probably to still like reach out to understand how to put these things together properly and maintain them? Or do you feel like it's already there where someone could literally just come through here and like make a few clicks and build what could ultimately be a really successful company a year from now?
Yeah, I kind of think we're already there. And like, if you go back to kind of the social proof, like Mode and Zora are examples of two companies that are doing really, really well. And if you launch this, you actually literally get the same configuration that they have in the same infrastructure.
Hmm.
And I think there's kind of a distinction here between like, I think Conduit is building a platform, and I think a lot of other folks are more like services businesses where, you know, they manage everything and kind of build things one off. And if we're talking about, for example, customization, I think there's some nuance there in what you actually enable. And so, for example, like these modular options create ability to customize. But if you're building a super custom blockchain, that's something that we would definitely love to explore. But also comes with other overheads. And as an example, I think the deeper that you want to customize a rollup framework, I think the more you need to keep kind of like a protocol team on staff to update and maintain that, not to mention security audits and all this other stuff. It starts to get more expensive. But I think increasingly what we're seeing is that it's harder to get future upgrades. And so there are some chains out there today that went super custom and maybe they're not posting blobs yet, for example, or haven't updated to the latest code. And if you're familiar with software, you know that like software kind of rots. And if you don't upgrade, there's a higher chance that there are vulnerabilities in there that haven't been patched, that it doesn't have the latest performance, improvements, or kind of new features. And so by sticking to, I think, the areas and axes of customizability and modularity that we enable out of the box, it enables you to pull in kind of those wave of updates as they're kind of getting pushed out, while kind of maintaining the kind of modularity that you're interested in. And so, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, what would maintenance look like for the average team after deploying with Conduit? I guess over 6 months from now, a year from now, like if they did want to make those updates, what would that look like for them?
So it's totally hands off. And I think for example, like we handle the upgrades on their behalf. I think the way to think about it is similar to like AWS or Google Cloud. You can opt into like certain upgrades, and we can handle it for you. You can click the button and like it upgrades. But principally, like you can kind of think about it as like no operations on your end. We handle everything, and you treat it as if it's just another blockchain. The only difference is that it's yours. And that has a variety of benefits, which we can go into later. But basically, the kind of what we're selling is kind of peace of mind and kind of zero maintenance on kind of our customers' end.
So what you have built here is non-trivial in terms of like engineering on the back end. So I'm just curious, like how many people work at Conduit, and how hard was it to actually make something like this work on the back end?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we're approaching like 15 people today, primarily engineering. And I mean, to answer your question, it's a crazy amount of engineering and kind of time on operations and understanding these stacks. And I think where we really differentiate is, again, we're building the platform and doing things so we can usher in like 1 million of these, and maybe like 1,000 over the next 1 to 2 years. And the only way to do that is to be able to automate it. And so I think um, the way we think about it is every incremental hour or every incremental minute we spend on the automation and making the platform better is something that we can then distribute to every single rollup on Conduit. And that is increasingly becoming like, in some ways, like a weapon, because Conduit rollups get the latest upgrades before anyone else. And this also comes down for things like, if we're talking about peace of mind, things like security patches, or if there's like a new vulnerability in a rollup framework, making sure that we can roll out those fixes as quickly as possible, versus like struggling, again, if everything is super custom and each stack is different, then like I need to apply a patch to maybe like 10 different code bases and then make sure I'm like applying the right version for all of these. And it gets really tricky and easy to make a mistake. Whereas if everything is uniform and kind of automated, that becomes as easy as building one container image and then rolling that out everywhere. And so that's what we're excited about. I think it's the only way to really scale crypto is to make this as easy as possible. And I think we're excited for Conduit to be like the distributors of kind of the software and those upgrades.
Right now, you seem to be focused on EVM. Is that something that you're going to continue focusing on, or are you considering adding other types of execution environments?
We're definitely considering it. I think the kind of most salient update here today is we're really excited about Stylus, which is an Arbitrum Orbit kind of technology. And Stylus is a WASM-based VM. It will interoperate with the EVM. So traditionally, the hardest thing about a new VM is just like you need all the tooling, and you kind of take it for granted today, where you have Block Explorer, you have debuggers, you have data indexers, et cetera, et cetera. I think with any new VM, you have to build that up from scratch. And so I think the interesting thing about Stylus is that it works side by side with the EVM, so that you still have the EVM, but you also have this like new thing which can be incrementally adopted. And so that's what we're excited about. Medium term to long term, I think we just have to see where the demand is. And I think there's a lot of hype around new VMs. I don't know that I've seen one that has really taken off. I think maybe you can look at Solana, and there's some like interesting things happening there, whether it is kind of Solana itself as an L1 or bringing that technology as a layer 2 to Ethereum. I think you still have a lot of the same challenges around the tooling. And so for us, we're very focused on the EVM today. In the future, I think, again, we're going to be very guided based off of where the demand is and how good the tech is. And so there are certainly exciting options out there, and we'd love to see where they are in a year or two.
Yeah, the tooling is definitely a big one. It seems like that it's something that's not talked about a lot when people are innovating in that area, because it's obviously there's a lot of improvements that can be done to the EVM, but then you have to think about all of the supporting infrastructure and how like large of a task it is to kind of like rebuild all of that and get adoption across the board. And you mentioned block explorers. So when someone launches a Conduit chain, I guess they get a block explorer as well.
Yeah. So with Conduit, every deployment comes with a block explorer, and I can show you here real quick.
Yeah, let me pull that up. Okay, cool. It's up now.
Sweet. And so this is just like the test explorer. But you can then customize this from kind of the Conduit UI. So you can change this color, you can change the name, you can add a logo. And so like, again, I think for us, one of the comments we got early on in Conduit's, early life was that if the block explorer doesn't exist, like the chain almost doesn't exist, right? Because if you can't see what's going on chain, it might as well kind of not exist. And so that's where I think being able to bundle in what is kind of the minimum viable tool set is really important anytime you need to launch a new domain, right? And so again, this is something that I think a lot of users and devs take for granted on existing chains, is that a lot of the times the infra is already deployed and exists. But when you need to launch your own, suddenly that becomes kind of a big barrier. And so like increasingly, I think, we've been a pretty big chunk off of that, but increasingly we want to do that, kind of bundle in more and more of these just to streamline the process, whether that's, working with really great teams, like for example, Tenderly is a really great team we work with that offers really great debugging tools, or, offering these as kind of first party products on top of Conduit.
So one of the reasons that people often deploy rollup is for customization for something that they're building a front end application for. Essentially, like you have this idea of app chains or the rollup chain or app chain thesis, where for example, I think you have like DeFi protocols and social protocols now with like Lens and even CyberConnect, and then you even have Warpcast and Farcaster. Like they essentially built their own protocol to kind of, or whatever you would call that, like their own backend system even. But if someone wanted to have some type of specialization, I guess, at when they're building out their rollup for whatever that they're focusing on at the app layer, is that something that you all would be able to help support, and how would that look?
For sure. It's definitely something we'd like to explore. I think, I think an underappreciated aspect of blockchains today and rollups is that they actually enable you to go or like use much more compute on chain than you could on a shared layer. And so as an example, like Proof of Play is a game on top of Conduit. They have their own L3. They were spending anywhere from 1 to 20K a day on gas fees on Arbitrum Nova, which is like insane, right?
Wow, that's
And
insane
so
because the Arbitrum Nova is so cheap already.
it was supposed to be the cheapest chain. And effectively that meant they had to rate limit how many users were playing their game. Because it's like, if each user is going to cost me like $100, then only so many people can actually play this game at a time. And so that's where launching their own chain enabled them to actually internalize those fees. And so instead of paying like, I guess if it was at 20K a day, like 600K a month for gas fees, they now pay like Conduit 6K a month, right? And they kind of internalize those fees, and it scales much, much better with their volume. And so I think an underrated aspect of, again, running your own chain is you get much more compute. It's much cheaper. And there are a lot of improvements coming to the EVM. If you've heard of Reth, that's a good example of pushing the performance frontier. And then two, I think Stylus, again, on the Arbitrum side, is an example of the compute is going to be like 10x better than just stock EVM. And that actually means like what might have been a precompile before can actually just be developed within Stylus. And so I think that tends to be a much cleaner way, because like if you look at how we do just standard Web 2 compute today, right? We're very rarely going in and like adding new instructions or adding new things. It's just fast enough that we can kind of just build anything. And so the EVM and like all these things, they're Turing complete. And so you should be able to build everything that you want. You just have traditionally been held back in terms of the gas limit, and your own chain actually enables you to lift that constraint. And so I think a lot of folks that are leaning custom have actually realized that they can either use something like a Stylus or really just go faster on the EVM.
I really need to check out Stylus. In fact, I think I'm going to try to bring someone on to talk specifically about that now, because you've mentioned it a few times and I've actually heard it a lot this week, and a couple other conversations. Well, I guess it was last week when I was in Prague. And I have a question now about tokens. So if someone wants to launch their own network token, how does that work?
Yeah. So
Gas token, I guess.
going back to I guess I need to share this one. So going back to the deployment, again, both of these stacks support custom gas token. And so you just need to go to the UI and like enable it.
Oh, dang, that's cool. Okay.
Kind of pass an address here, and then you're good to go.
That's pretty simple.
Very simple. And I think really modular DA made this possible, because ultimately, if you're using a network token for sequencer revenue, but then you're paying kind of DA fees in Ethereum, which today are cheaper, but as you know, back in December, super expensive with call data. It just didn't make economic sense. And I think now that we have a bevy of kind of DA options that make that much cheaper, it's really enabling kind of the custom gas token, kind of network token stuff that you're seeing today.
So we have covered quite a bit today. I have maybe one more question that's not specifically about Conduit, how it works or anything like that, but it's more about kind of zooming out and looking at the entire modular space. And the roll-up centric roadmap of Ethereum and how you chose to build in this like space as your next move. You kind of touched on it before, but I guess like what made you bet on like this specific idea as a product, and how it relates to like how you see the future of the industry playing out. I know we've seen a lot of discussion lately around like vertical versus horizontal scalability or scaling, and we mentioned like the app chain thesis, but like what is your general like thesis around how the blockchain industry is going to play out over the next 5 or so years, and how that kind of drove you to build Conduit in the first place?
Yeah. Well, just to preface, I think 5 years is a long time in crypto, so I don't know if anybody can call that. I think, but just to give you like my kind of take here, I think if you look at the amount of stuff that happens on chain today, it's embarrassingly small, and that it's almost very bearish on crypto if this is kind of the end state, right? And I think if you're bullish on crypto, we're going to need more of these compute environments, more of these rollups, because like Visa alone is at 50K transactions a second, right? And there's a lot more than Visa in the world, right? There's a lot of internet applications that are even higher throughput than that. And so if you believe that on-chain is freedom, if you believe that new types of applications will be able to be built uniquely on-chain, really the rate limiting factor today is just how much throughput you can get, right? How much on-chain compute can I get? And is it cheap enough that I can actually use it? And so we're accelerationists in that sense. And we really believe that one, like I think horizontal scaling and vertical scaling, I think you want both, is kind of the answer. And that if each, specific instance of a, rollups are like many rollups are like horizontally scaling because you have many of them. And then if each of them is like super, super beefy, like that's where you start to get like kind of a lot of returns, right? Because not only do you have many of these, each of them is getting much, much more performant. And so that starts to look a lot similar to Web 2, where again, we have like billions of these servers.
Yeah, you kind of have like application specific databases as the default in Web 2.
And so stuff is just getting better. And I think if we were in a period of, in some ways in Ethereum, there's a bit of a period of stagnation performance wise because rollups hadn't quite taken off yet. And for decentralization purposes, we couldn't push gas limits on Ethereum L1. I think we're starting to enter that phase where performance is becoming kind of the key issue. And we're excited for what that's going to bring developers and folks in the Ethereum ecosystem. There's just a ton of this latent demand that's built up over time. And we're finally giving them the supply of compute in order to enable kind of what they want to build. And so we're excited for that. We're super bullish on that. I think, in some ways in the future, you might not even know you're on like an L5 or like an L10. You'll just be on chain somewhere and the chain will be abstracted away. And so if I'm thinking through what the future looks like, I think we just want abundant on-chain compute. And I think the user ultimately probably won't realize they're on-chain. And so that's the world that we want to live in. We want to build freedom technology that enables folks to, kind of permissionlessly interact. And we're excited for Conduit to be at the forefront of that.
Very last question. Do you feel that people can start experimenting with these at hackathons and start deploying stuff like this just as they experiment and learn how to use it now?
For sure. I think again, we make it super easy to spin up. We can sometimes give credits to folks at specific hackathons if like $50 is too much. And I think it's so easy to get started that I think it's really enabling anybody to deploy. And so, yeah, I think the best way is actually to just go to this deployment UI, so app.conduit.xyz. And then we're happy to give out kind of free credits and vouchers to folks that are building something cool. So if you are, definitely get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. If you're watching this, check out, I think the handle is @ConduitXYZ on Twitter. and check out their website. Try deploying a roll up, and next time you're at a hackathon, experiment with it. There, you never know. You know, the more things that you understand how to use, the more bright ideas that you might have. So thank you, Andrew, for your time today. This has been really helpful. Thanks for everyone that came on and watched. This video will also be up on YouTube if you missed any part of it in a couple of hours, hopefully. If not, maybe by the end of tomorrow. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.